Over 150 individual parts. Laser cut from 18 sheets of plywood and 14 sheets of acrylic. Coming together to build this one-of-a-kind coffee table. Canyon topography with a layered river flowing through it. I'm going to cover the entire build, starting with the design and ending with the final piece. And while I've made plenty of wall art, this is going to be my first attempt at furniture. There will be some big mistakes along the way, but I'm really proud of the final product. If you've ever wanted to make topographic art like this, I'll show you where you can find contour data for free, as well as some tips I've learned doing this over the years. Thank you to xTool for sponsoring today's video. So let's figure out a good size for this table before we head out to the new workshop and get started. You typically want a coffee table to be the same height or a few inches shorter than your couch, and in my case that's 15 inches tall. And for the area, I'm thinking something close to 4 foot wide by 2 feet deep. For this piece, I'm taking inspiration from the Abyss coffee table by Duffy London, as well as the work of Ben Young. I use plywood a lot for custom maps, but I'm really excited to start experimenting with layered acrylic. It's just such a cool way to represent water. I'm thinking 3/8 inch Baltic birch plywood for the canyon topography, and then I'm going to fill that in with pieces of 1/8 inch thick acrylic that will have a bluish tint. For custom legs, the core of each leg is a laser cut board to help match the look of the tabletop. And I'm going to order a piece of tempered glass to be the top surface, so you don't need to worry about your coffee falling into the canyon. This glass is the only thing I'm not cutting myself, so I need to figure out what sizes are available to easily order. I found an option that's pretty close to the goal, and that's what I'm going to use to constrain our design. I also like that it maintains the same thickness as the plywood it's going to be stacked on top of. And now I can start working on the design that I'm going to run on my laser cutter. And I'm going to start with one of my favorite free resources, USGS. I'm downloading an image that contains elevation data, and specifically I'm using the Acrylic River located in Utah as my inspiration. And then I can open this image in QGIS, which is a free software, and from this program I can generate my contour lines. 10 layers seems like a good place to start, with each layer of plywood being 3/8 of an inch. That'll give me a 3 3/4 inch depth to this tabletop. If you're like me, your first instinct is going to be to use a full sheet of material to cut each layer of your contour. So as an example, we have 10 layers for a simple topographic map. We'll cut each of them out from their own sheet and stack them on top of each other. And we have our map, and it looks good, but we used 10 full sheets of material when really we could have done this with only 2. And let me show you how. We're going to alternate which layer will be cut from each sheet so that the contours are evenly split between the two. And once we cut these out, we can stack them together like so to get a similar result as before, but the difference is this one will be hollowed out on the back since we aren't wasting material inside where you'll never see it. This also has the benefit of making your piece lighter. One limit to this, however, is once the design gets too steep and your contour lines get too close together, you're going to start to get really thin sections which might be hard to cut out and handle without breaking. The canyon design I'm using today is fairly steep, so instead of 2 sheets of material, I'm going to split my contours between 4. I'll be able to keep a little bit more meat between these cuts while still ending up with some steep canyon walls. This map is 4 times larger than the cutting bed on my xTool P2S, and to get around this, I'm going to split the design into 4 quarters that will each fit within a 12 by 24 inch sheet of plywood. Each of these sections will need 4 sheets, so we're going to start with 16 sheets total for the tabletop. This is the thickest plywood I've ever cut on a laser cutter, and I wanted to take this opportunity to test out the new machine and see if it could handle it. And sure enough, the 55 watt P2S was able to cut through these with a single pass. I ran a few small tests, built some confidence, and then I got to work on all the sheets. 16 sheets with each one taking about a half an hour. I'm also using the scoring function on this laser cutter to give me some guidelines. I'm tracing the layer that will sit on top of each piece, so I'll have a reference when I'm gluing it all together. Now I did start to notice on my sheets that there were places where the laser wasn't cutting all the way through. No big deal, I thought. I run into this every so often on the thinner 1/8 inch sheets that I more typically use. It's just caused by globs of glue in the plywood or hidden knots in these core layers of the sheets that a laser won't be able to vaporize. Usually I just have to give it a few scores with the X-Acto knife or some light sanding and it'll be able to break free. But I'm realizing this is going to be much more challenging with this thicker wood. This is not a fault of the laser cutter. It comes down to the quality of the plywood you're using, and these sheets were very reasonably priced, so I can't be too upset about these internal imperfections. I just need to find a good solution to get around this. And even though I can't stand the sound of an oscillating tool, this is going to be my best bet for finishing all these cuts. In the future, if I'm working on a project this large, I'll just splurge on the higher quality plywood, or even look at solid boards to try to avoid this secondary finishing. I use some solid pieces with the same thickness later in the process, and you'll see how much easier they cut on this machine. You'll notice some other features on these sheets besides the contour cuts and the score marks. These larger features are going to be the openings that I'll use to mount the table legs eventually, and these smaller ones have a couple purposes. You'll see in the final design that there are a few layers that are fully sandwiched inside of the tabletop in this top section of the design. And I wanted to cut some material out of these layers to try to save some weight. These little cutouts are also going to be helpful when I start gluing everything up. I can use them as temporary blocking to help support thin parts of the design. And since they're the same thickness, I can easily stack them for any part of the design that needs support. For the first layer, I'm going to use some CA glue or regular super glue to help hold these 4 sections together. I don't need the full strength of a wood glue in this layer, I just need something to hold these in place while I start building on top of it. I've cut out a few pieces of the Acrylic River that I can use to help get the right spacing on these initial parts of the build. Once I have good coverage with this wood glue, I'm using 18 gauge brad nails to hold the parts together while the glue cures. The real strength comes from the glue. The nails are just removing the need for clamps, which would really slow down a project like this. I'm going to take care of these rough edges the oscillating tool made by doing some light sanding, and then I'm just going to coat it with this black acrylic paint. Once the paint dries, these edges are very hard to pick out. You'll also notice that I went ahead and pre-labeled every piece of wood before I started the glue up. I made sure to mark all of these behind the next score line, so all of these labels are going to get covered up by the next piece of wood. Another part of the design that I wanted to put some thought in was how I would handle the seams between the 4 sections. I made sure to stagger the seam location between each layer of the assembly, and this helps give some strength to the table, but it also makes the seams stand out less in the final design. At each step of the build, I'm putting some wood filler into the gaps and also doing some light sanding to help blend these together. I also decided to add an 11th layer to the top of this map, and these parts are just going to be here to cover the large seams on top that were going to be more difficult to hide. With the majority of the glue up finished, I'm going to use some compressed air to blow any dust or soot out before we continue. And here you can really see why I wanted to cover those top seams. For the table legs, I'm going to use a couple of boards that are going to sandwich a laser cut piece of wood. Since I have all the exposed laser cut edges in the tabletop, I really wanted to find a way to incorporate that into the legs as well. I'm cutting these boards to size and adding a 1/4 inch radius to the edge that will be on the outside of the legs. And for the core cuts, I had some leftover solid sheets that were pretty convenient for the size I would need. Like I said earlier, these boards are the same 9mm thickness as the contour plywood, but since they're solid wood, I can cut them at twice the speed, 10mm per second versus 5. The camera view really makes life easy on the P2S Laser Cutter. I can just throw the boards into the machine and then easily shift my design to where it needs to be. Adding these boards to the legs is going to look good, but it's also going to help wedge and hold the foot in these sockets. The clamps came off the next morning, and this is starting to look like a table. The large seams on top are now hidden with another layer of wood, which is going to bring us up to the 18 sheets total we needed. And before I add the Acrylic River, I'm going to seal the wood with some semi-gloss polyurethane. 3 coats of this to give the table some shine, and also seal in any soot from the laser cut edges. After a quick cleaning of the laser cutter, we're finally ready to start on the river. Unlike the topographic data I was able to get online for the canyon contours, I had to come up with this river topo myself. I ran some fluid simulations using Blender, which is the same software I use for all of the animations I've shown in this video. Using these simulations, I was able to get a general idea of what the river layering should look like, and then I used that as a reference while I manually drew the contour data in AutoCAD. I brought this back into Blender to make sure it was going to look good, and once I was happy with the design, it was time to start cutting. When you have parts that are going to fit together like this in sort of a puzzle piece fashion, clearance between them is going to be very important. This whole table has been hand assembled so far, and nothing is going to be perfect. If I cut the river layers perfectly to my design, there's a good chance some aren't going to fit in place. So I'm going to give myself some extra clearance here and remove material from the edges of my parts. And I'm going to do that using the Kerf offset tool with the xTool software. Even though this laser cuts with a very fine point, there's still a measurable gap that's left in the material, and this is known as the kerf. When we cut out a shape, the kerf is going to make our finished part slightly smaller than what we have drawn in the software. If you want the part to be exact, you need to offset the cut line outward, and xTool has a simple tool for doing this. But in our case, we actually want to do the opposite. We want to adjust the cut line inward to give ourselves more clearance. And I'm going to do this by entering a value of -0.25. Once I was happy with the fit on some test pieces, I was ready to run all of the rest of the acrylic sheets. And now all we need is the tempered glass tabletop. I am really happy with how this piece turned out. I think this will end up being the first furniture build of many. But coming up next, we have our backyard renovation to finish and plenty of other projects to get to. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and we'll see you next time.